Everyone in that diner saw the man bleeding in the corner, and everyone chose to look away. Everyone, except me. I wasn't thinking about being brave. I wasn't thinking about danger. I was thinking about rent, about my little boy back home in Nairobi, about the long shift I had just finished and how tired I was. But something in me wouldn't let me sit still. That man was hurt. And no one was helping him. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what kind of trouble he was in. All I knew was this: if I walked away, I would never forgive myself. So I stood up and walked straight toward him. I didn't know that decision would change my life forever. My name is Mary Katani. I'm a nurse, a mother. And I come from a small town near Lake Victoria in Kenya. Where I grew up, people don't ignore someone in pain. My mother was a midwife. My grandmother healed people with herbs. Helping others wasn't something we talked about. It's just what we did. For 6 years, I worked at Kenyatta National Hospital in Nairobi. I worked long hours. I stayed calm in emergencies. People trusted me, but being good at your job doesn't always pay the bills. I had a young son to raise, school fees to cover, a family depending on me. So when I got the chance to work in Seoul, South Korea, I took it, even though it meant leaving my son behind with my mother. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. I told myself it was temporary, that I would come back stronger, but life doesn't always follow the plan you make. I had been in Seoul for over a year when I walked into that diner and saw the man everyone else had already decided to ignore. It was a Tuesday evening in November. One of those evenings where the cold in Seoul has an edge to it, not just cold but asterisk deliberate, like the wind is making a point. I had just finished a brutal overnight shift at the private medical clinic in Gangnam, a pediatric emergency. A 2-year-old girl with a respiratory infection who had scared me badly before stabilizing around 4 a.m. By the time I walked out into the pale gray Seoul morning, I felt hollowed out in the way only nurses understand, completely empty, but somehow still functional. I stopped at a small noodle soup diner near my apartment. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Park, always gave me extra broth because she said I looked like I needed feeding. I had been coming there for months. It was the closest thing I had to a home in that city. I sat at the counter. I ordered my usual, and then something made me look toward the back of the restaurant. I do not know why I looked. Maybe it was instinct, the same nurse instinct that had me scanning every room for the most critical patient before I even realized I was doing it. I looked. And I saw him. He was in the corner booth. A Korean man, perhaps 40 years old, dressed in a dark suit that had clearly been expensive before someone partially ruined it. He was sitting very still, which in itself was not remarkable. What was remarkable was the way 3 other men stood around his booth, not like friends, not like colleagues. Like predators who had cornered something and were deciding how to finish it. The man in the booth had his left arm resting on the table. His right arm, I could see this clearly even from the counter, hung at his side completely still. Not resting, not relaxed, suspended, like a word permanently stuck on the tip of your tongue. His right hand did not move once, not even slightly, and the way he leaned his entire body slightly left told me he had been compensating for that stillness for a very long time. He was disabled on his right side, and the men standing over him knew it, and they were using it. One of them leaned down and said something close to his ear. The man in the booth did not flinch. He stared straight ahead with eyes that were absolutely still, the kind of stillness you practice for years. But beneath the table, his left hand gripped the seat edge until his knuckles went pale. He was not going to ask for help. That much was clear. Nobody in that restaurant was going to give it to him either, except I was already standing up. I do not remember making the decision. My body made it for me, the same body that had walked toward 100 emergencies while everyone else stepped back. I picked up my soup bowl, my bag, and I walked to that corner booth. I sat down directly across from the man in the suit as if I had been sitting there the whole time. I looked up at the 3 men. And I said in English, slow, calm, absolute, "My husband has been waiting. Thank you for keeping him company." The men stared at me. I smiled. The way my mother taught me to smile when I needed to take up space in a room that did not expect me. Big, unafraid, immovable. One of them spoke in Korean. The tone was ugly and dismissive. They were deciding whether I was worth their time. Mrs. Park appeared from behind the counter. 70 years old and tiny, but she held herself like a woman who had buried harder problems than these men. She spoke to them sharply in Korean. Her voice did not rise, but something in it made them step back. She gestured toward the door. She kept talking until they walked through it. I waited until the door closed. Then I exhaled. Then I looked at the man across from me. He was looking at me like I had done something he genuinely could not calculate. I said, "You are bleeding through your jacket, left side." Just below the ribs. He looked down. He looked back at me. And in English, accented, careful, precise, he said, "How did you see that?" I said, "I am a nurse." "Shall I look at it?" A long silence. The kind that is not empty, the kind that is full of a man deciding something important. He said, "Yes." His name was Park Jae-hun. He did not tell me who he was that night. He let me clean and dress the wound, a deep laceration, already partially closed, clearly not new, right there in the back booth while Mrs. Park stood guard at the door pretending to wipe tables. He sat perfectly still while I worked. The way patients sit when they have been trained to endure pain silently. I recognized that training. I had seen it in soldiers, in people who had survived things that permanently rewired their relationship with their own bodies. When I finished, I gave him wound care instructions in the tone I used with all my patients, direct, warm, no drama. He listened to everything. He nodded once. Then he said, "What is your name?" I told him. He repeated it carefully. "Mary," like he was placing it somewhere safe. He came back the following Tuesday. He sat in the same booth. He asked Mrs. Park to tell me he was there if I happened to come in. I happened to come in. We talked for 2 hours. He asked about Kenya with the kind of curiosity that is not performance, real questions. What does Lake Victoria smell like in the early morning? What does your son laugh at? What do you miss most? I told him about Tobias. About how he collected smooth stones from the lakeshore and kept them in a tin box under his bed. About how his laugh came from somewhere deep in his belly, the way his grandfathers had. About how I video called him every Sunday at 8 p.m. Nairobi time, and how those 30 minutes were the architecture that held my entire week together. Jae-hun listened to all of it. He did not perform sympathy. He did not offer easy comfort. He simply listened, fully, quietly, the way people listen when they understand that listening is itself a form of love. We kept meeting. Every Tuesday, then twice a week. Then it became something with no name, something warm and careful and quietly extraordinary. But the world has a way of destroying unnamed beautiful things before they can grow strong enough to survive. His people found out about me, not his enemies, his own people. I should tell you what I learned about Jae-hun slowly, in pieces. Park Jae-hun led an organization that operated in the gray spaces between law and power in Seoul. He had built it over 2 decades, with intelligence and absolute discipline. 3 years before I met him, a car accident had permanently damaged the nerves controlling his entire right side, his arm, his grip, his leg. He had lost none of his mind. He had lost none of his authority, but he had lost the physical invincibility that men in his world used as currency. And in that world, a man who could not fully use his right hand was a man his enemies studied carefully. His second in command was a man named Kang. Kang was sharp, elegant, and completely dedicated to Jae-hun's organization, which meant he was dedicated to its survival above everything else, including its leader's happiness. The first time I met him, he looked at me the way engineers look at a crack in a structure they have spent years building. Not hatred, something more dangerous. Cold, precise assessment. He spoke to Jae-hun directly in front of me for several minutes in Korean. Jae-hun's face did not change, but his left hand, the one that always told the truth, tightened slowly against his leg. Later, Jae-hun told me everything Kang had said, because Jae-hun, I had learned, did not lie to the people he chose to trust. In a world built entirely on layers of deception, he had this one stubborn, almost holy commitment to honesty. Kang had said, asterisk, a foreign woman with no family here, no connections, no understanding of what you carry. You are already seen as weakened since the accident. This woman will be used against you. She is a door your enemies will walk through. Then Kang had said something else, something that stayed with me longer than anything. He had said, asterisk, she does not belong in your world. And you do not belong in hers. Feelings are not a strategy. I sat with those words for days, because here is what I had to be honest about, even to myself. Even in the privacy of my own chest at 2 a.m., when the Seoul streets were quiet, and Tobias was sleeping safely in Nairobi, and I was lying awake thinking about a man with one working hand who remembered the name of my son's favorite stone. I was afraid, not of Kang, not of the world Jae-hun moved through. I was afraid of what I felt, of how quickly it had grown, of how much of my carefully constructed armor had quietly dissolved in the presence of this man I had loved before, in Nairobi, completely, dangerously, with everything I had. And that man had looked at me and Tobias and the full weight of what we were and chosen something lighter. I had rebuilt myself from that breaking. I had rebuilt myself into someone practical, forward-moving, someone who did not gamble with her heart in games she could not afford to lose. And now here was this impossible, complicated, quietly beautiful man, and here was everything I had promised myself I was finished with. I was still deciding what to do about it when everything exploded. 3 months after we met, Jae-hun was attacked, not in a diner, not somewhere I could walk into with a smile and change the outcome. I received a call at 2 a.m., unknown number, a woman's voice broke in English. Mary, Jae-hun is hurt. He is asking for you. I arrived to find him on the floor of a room I had never seen, in a building I did not know, in a part of Seoul that felt like a different city entirely. The men around him were already making calls, already moving, but they parted when I walked in because he had asked for me specifically, and in that world, what Jae-hun asked for, people delivered. What I found, a man who had been attacked by people who knew exactly where his body was most vulnerable, his right side, his weakened leg, the arm that could not defend itself, they had known. They had targeted every specific place. The accident had already broken him. That knowledge did not come from enemies who had studied him from a distance. That knowledge came from someone close. I worked on him for 40 minutes before the ambulance arrived, focused, quiet, methodical. My hands doing what they have always done, finding the wound, stopping what needed stopping, holding what needed holding. But in the part of me that was not a nurse that night, in the part that was simply Mary Katani from Kisumu, sitting on a cold floor in Seoul at 2 a.m., I was speaking to God in Luo, the language my grandmother prayed in, because some prayers only work in the language of your roots. I thought about Tobias, about what I would tell him if I had to call my mother in the morning, with the kind of news that changes the shape of a family forever. I pressed my hands against Jae-hun's side and I thought, not tonight, not this man, not after everything. He survived. 3 days later, from a hospital bed with a bruised face and eyes still sharp as cut glass, he looked at me and said 2 words. It was Kang, the man who had called me a problem. The man who had worried loudly about Jae-hun's weakness. The man who had said asterisk feelings are not a strategy, had made his own cold calculation. Had decided a disabled boss becoming emotionally distracted was a liability the organization could not carry. Had given Jae-hun's enemies exactly what they needed to finish what the accident had started. Jae-hun said it quietly, no drama, the way he said all hard things. I held his left hand, the one that had learned to carry everything alone, and I did not speak for a long time. Then I said, asterisk, what will you do? He looked at me. And he said, asterisk, what will asterisk we do? That word. That one small word that contains an entire universe when you have spent years conjugating your life in the singular. I felt it move through me like a current, and then I started crying, not the quiet, dignified kind. The deep, broken. Honest kind, the kind that carries 14 months of loneliness, and 6 years of fighting alone, and one marriage that ended in a Nairobi parking lot, and a mother with painful knees and a little boy's tin box of smooth stones and blistered feet, and every Tuesday in a city that saw a foreigner first and a person second. Jae-hun did not tell me to stop. He did not reach for easy comfort. He held my hand with his left hand, the only one he had full command of, and he let me be entirely, completely, honestly undone. That was when I knew. When Jae-hun recovered, the first decision he made was about me. He called me to his quiet apartment near Bukshan Hanok village, wooden floors, a single shelf of books, his mother's photograph above the kitchen doorway. He made tea himself. Slowly. Using only his left hand, refusing my offer to help with the particular pride I had learned to respect rather than fight. He sat across from me at the low table. No performance, no strategy. Just his eyes on mine. He said, "I want to make you an offer, not because of the diner, not because of the floor on the worst night, but because I have spent 3 years since the accident learning that the world I built will destroy everything I love if I let it keep operating the way it always has. I want to change it. And I want to do that beside someone who walked toward a bleeding stranger when every single person in that room looked away." He paused. "I am not asking you to be part of what I was. I am asking you to be part of what I am choosing to become." I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, "Jae-hun, I need you to understand something about me. I am a Kenyan woman. I am a mother before I am anything else. I was built by Lake Victoria, and by a grandmother who healed people with her hands, and by a mother who brought babies into the world at 3 a.m. without ever flinching. I carry all of that. It will not disappear for anyone, not even for you." He said, "I know," I said. "If this is real, it will be hard." He said, "Everything real is hard." I said, "My son comes first." "Always," he said, "of course." No hesitation, not even half a second. I looked at him for a long, honest moment, at the face that had been perfectly still in that booth while men loomed over him, at the hand that gripped the seat until it went pale, at the eyes that, beneath all the practiced stillness, held something I recognized because I had felt it myself. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been strong for too long and longs, quietly and desperately, for someone to simply stand beside them. I said yes. Tobias arrived in Seoul on a Thursday in March. He came off the plane wearing his school uniform because my mother had dressed him in it. She said if he was going to a new country, he should look like he respected it. He was 8 years old. He had his tin box of smooth stones in his backpack. When he saw me, he ran. When he saw Jae-hun standing beside me in the arrivals hall, his left hand raised in greeting, his right side still. His face doing the thing it did when he was nervous, but refusing to show it. Tobias stopped and looked up at him with the unfiltered honesty of a child who has not yet learned to be polite at the expense of truth. He said, "Mama said your right side doesn't work properly." Jae-hun crouched down slowly, carefully to Tobias's eye level. He said, "Yes, that is true." Tobias thought about this seriously. Then he said, "My grandma's knees don't work properly either. She still walks everywhere." Jae-hun said, "She sounds like a strong woman." Tobias said, "She is. Mama is too." He studied Jae-hun one moment longer. Then he reached into his backpack, opened his tin box, and selected one smooth gray stone. He held it out with both hands. "You can have this one. It is from Lake Victoria. It is the lucky one." Jae-hun took it with his left hand. He held it like it was something sacred. Which, watching his face in that arrivals hall, I understood that it was. Mrs. Park came to Tobias's first school performance in Seoul 4 months later and cried louder than anyone in the building. She brought him extra dumplings wrapped in foil and told him in Korean, which he was already beginning to learn, that he had his mother's eyes. He did not fully understand her words yet. But he understood her completely. I have been asked many times what the lesson is in all of this. I think about my grandmother, who healed people with plants that grew along the lakeshore. She used to say, "Water finds the path that already exists." but fire makes a new one. She meant that sometimes healing restores what was, and sometimes you have to burn something down entirely to find what should have been all along. I walked into that diner exhausted, broke, and alone. I saw a man in a corner booth holding himself together with nothing but stillness and one working hand. And something in me, something older than strategy, older than self-protection, older than every wall I had built since Nairobi, simply stood up and walked toward him. That was the fire. Everything that came after, the foundation we built together, the asterisk Kateni Park name on the door with mine listed first because Jae-hun insisted, and I loved him completely for it. Tobias learning Korean and teaching Jae-hun how to say, "The stone is lucky," in Luo, all of that was the new path. Mercy is never wasted, even in a city that did not expect it from you, especially not then, for Tobias. For every smooth stone carried from the lake, for the left hand that held everything the right one could not, for every woman who stood up when sitting down was easier. Thank you for listening to this story. If it meant something to you, there's more like it here. You're always welcome to come back for more.